Introduction to the REU program. Our two speakers today, Deanna Kidd and Jenna Rubens. Deanna is from Moorhead University and Jenna is from Transylvania University, and both of them participated this last year in our research experiences for undergrads program. So Kelly Watson and I are gonna give you just a quick overview of that program. And so I'm going to start by just showing you a couple slides to help kind of outline the program. This is an NSF-funded program, and this past summer was the fourth year of the program. The theme of the program is disturbance ecology, and so we're interested in doing research and studying things going on in Appalachia, specifically related to both natural and anthropogenic disturbances. The program is really all about student training, and we bring in 10 students every summer and pair them up with mentors who are usually faculty from EKU in biology or geosciences, but we've also had some mentors from other agencies. The students are given a stipend. It's a generous stipend of $600 a week. We provide housing and some other benefits like travel support, a food allowance. This past year, they got a Wi-Fi cellular allowance, and then we also support their research. The students in the program work with faculty and also with agency professionals, and they develop their own research project. But they also are involved in professional development workshops all summer long, like workshops like how to ethically conduct research, workshops about statistical analysis and GIS, workshops about how to get into graduate school and how to present at conferences. And then we also have a bunch of team building trips where we try to build up a cohort of, a group, much like we see with grad students who kind of get to know each other and bond through their graduate experience. We try to create that kind of atmosphere over the summer with our REU students and hoping that they will continue on as friends and colleagues outside of the program. So, so just to give you a taste for some of the types of research that's occurred in the past as part of this program. Remember, each student is developing their own research project along with their advisor or mentor. And we'll hear today from Deanna about her research with plants, and Jenna about her research with the geohydrology of wetlands. But we've had a lot of cool different types of projects, including studies of birds and bee communities and bear populations, several fish studies. It's been a whole lot of different types of research subjects that really reflects the diversity of research that's going on in our department and with our agencies. So we allow the students to kind of develop their own projects, but we really provide guidance as faculty to kind of ensure that it's a successful project. So the goal of this study, in addition to training students in conducting research related to Appalachia and the ecology of Appalachia, another goal of this is to increase the participation of underrepresented groups in the sciences. And so we select and recruit participants from those underrepresented groups and provide them training. Every year we have about 300 applications to our program. We've had 41 participants over the last 4 years. The first 3 years of the program, Dr. Stephen Richter and I were the directors of it, and over this past year and for the next 2 years, it's Dr. Kelly Watson and I that are kind of guiding it. But we've had the program going for 4 years, and we've trained 41 students, including a high school student and a couple of local school teachers. almost all of our students are coming from smaller colleges where they don't get the opportunity or as much opportunity to do research. Most of them are freshmen and sophomores, so they have kind of the ability to come out of our program and further grow and develop as scientists while they're still undergrads. We've had a lot of first generation students. A lot of our students, a majority of them have come from Appalachian regions, and many of them are financially disadvantaged as well. So I think we've done a good job of kind of helping broaden participation in the sciences, and based on the criteria of underrepresented groups that's defined by NSF, as well as what we see as some other groups such as Appalachian communities. So almost all of our students go on to present at conferences, and we have several publications already out from this program, and many more I think to come in coming years as we kind of get past the early stages of the program. So for you students out there, we have a lot of information about our program on our website, and you're welcome to talk to me or Dr. Watson or any of the other faculty or graduate students. There's several past students around in the department and other people who've kind of participated in kind of guiding students or participated in their research, even if they weren't themselves REU students. So with that, Dr. Kelly Watson is going to add a few things.
All right, thanks, David. So I first wanted to just give a shout out to our mentors. 14 EKU faculty from both the departments of Biological Sciences and Geosciences have served as mentors. And of course, behind every great student, we're going to hear from two of them today, is a great mentor, mentors if they are involving their graduate students. And so today, of course, that would be Dr. Jen Koslow and Dr. Jonathan Malzone. Yeah, we really appreciate the mentors. And also, David and I are going to actually we'll be recruiting soon for the summer of 2021. And so just wanted to say that this is, if you haven't done it, this is an amazing, I think a really great experience, really enriching experience for both the student and also for the faculty. It ends up with these lasting relationships. We've even had a few of our students end up in as graduate students. I think Valerie, Dr. Peters, right? She has a new student who was one of the REU students. But I also wanted to say that it's, I know it might sometimes seem like, oh, I don't know if I want to take on a student in the summer, but really we use this networked mentoring approach. So it's not, you're not on your own completely as a mentor, but you're co-mentoring also with, David and I as the directors, and then we really would love to have graduate students involved. And it's a really good opportunity for graduate students to have some, assistance with maybe projects or research that they're working on. And also, we've also had a number of faculty that have, whether they've been mentors or not, that have given workshops for our REU students, like Dr. Koslow does the disturbance ecology workshop. And this is something that we would also like to recruit for, or if you have ideas for workshops that might be beneficial for the REU students. And something else that, for you guys who are graduate students out there, that's something you might also want to get involved with. And if you do, of course, talk to your advisor, but then, reach out to Dr. Brown or I. So yeah, that's what I had to say. So.
All right, thanks, Ted. It's back to you.
All right, thank you guys for that. So next we're going to move on to, I'm kind of volunteering Deanna to go first, I suppose. But Deanna Kidd, I think Dr. Brown already mentioned this, but comes to us from Moorhead, and I know she studies or has studied a lot of, done a lot of lichen work over there at Moorhead. And I got to work with her over the past summer, LCW, and it was a great time. And she was very, very helpful. Wouldn't have gotten through as near as many plots as we did in the time we did without her. So very thankful for her being able to join us out there. But Other than that, I guess I'll let you take it away, Deanna.
Okay, can you guys see my screen and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So my name's Deanna Kidd. Like they said, I'm a senior at Morehead State University. Worked with Dr. Kozlow and Ted to study hemlock woolly adelgid effects on mesic understory communities in an old growth forest. Oh no. Okay. A little bit of background about my study. Forests are dynamic systems. They never stop changing. This means that species composition and species dominance change over time. I did my study at Lilley Cornett Woods in Letcher County, and this allowed for long-term study options. The long-term study options were due to the decadal plots established by William Martin in 1971. And Lilley Cornett Woods was perfect because it had limited anthropogenic disturbance due to its protected nature. LCW also had a high rate of species richness and species diversity. And like I said, we studied hemlock, and hemlock's a unique species because it's an evergreen. It provides dense shade. It's found on moist midslopes at LCW, and it has a great effect on the hydrology of the ecosystem around it. We don't think that any other native species can completely take its place once it's gone. So the objectives of my study was to compare the 2020 understory data to the previous decadal data, specifically the data found in 2010 and 1999. We picked those years because LCW started treating for HWA in 2006. So the 1999 data would not have seen HWA effects, but the 2010 data and the 2020 data would have. So this was to answer the question, how have declining hemlock populations affected understory tree populations? And to do this, we picked Shop Hollow and Whitaker's beech and hemlock communities. We picked Shop Hollow and Whitaker because while hemlock occurs throughout LCW, hemlock dominant communities only occur in Shop Hollow and Whitaker. And we picked beech to compare to hemlock because beech and hemlock are both mesic. They occur right around the same elevation lines, and beech is the most common dominant community at LCW. And I want to kind of remind that my presentation only includes the understory results, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. A little bit more about Lilley Cornett Woods. So Lilley Cornett Woods is an old growth forest. This means it hasn't been clear cut and it has a multi-layered canopy. This is in contrast to second growth forests, which typically have been clear cut and they don't have the multi-layered canopy structure. Lilley Cornett Woods has been protected since 1969, and since then it hasn't had a record of human disturbance. It is currently under protection of EKU's Division of Natural Areas. And my study was done on the Martin decadal plots. The circle that just appeared shows the Martin plots in Whitaker Branch, and the second circle shows the Martin plots in Shop Hollow. This third circle shows the Martin plots in Big Everidge, and while my study doesn't include those are also surveyed every 10 years. A little bit more about the Martin plots. They include 135 permanent plots. Each of them cover 0.08 hectares, or 1/5 of an acre. My study includes 8 hemlock and 9 beech plots in Whitaker, which you can see on your left, and 3 hemlock and 10 beech plots in Shop Hollow, which you can see on your right. And the hemlock and beech communities are color-coded in each of these maps. A little bit more about hemlock and hemlock woolly adelgid. So hemlock woolly adelgid arrived in North America in the 1950s. It was first noticed in Richmond, Virginia, and then moved north. Hemlocks can die in as few as 4 years once they're infested, but most see total mortality in 10 years. And like I mentioned, Lilley Cornett Woods started treating for hemlock woolly adelgid in 2006. The picture you see shows a infested hemlock, and that was taken at LCW. This is showing a little bit about the hemlock health index we use to rate the health of hemlocks. It's a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being either completely healthy or 24% defoliated, and 5 being a dead hemlock. We didn't record 5s or dead trees, but most of the trees we did see were 3s and 4s, while we did see some 2s, regardless of if a plot was treated or not. Most of the trees we saw were 3s and 4s. A little bit more about our measurement. Our plots were 16-meter radius plots with an 8-meter inner radius. All overstory trees were measured. So overstory trees were trees that were 12.5 centimeters DBH. And then understory trees were trees that were 2.5 centimeters to 12.5 centimeters. So understory trees were only measured in the 8-meter inner radius plot. So my study includes understory trees, so trees in the 8-meter inner radius plot that were 2.5 to 12.5 centimeters DBH. So these were the response variables we used to measure community change. Some of these variables, like absolute density and species richness, show total change or overall change, while variables like relative density, relative basal area, and importance values show how species change within the different communities within the different locations. This is our first slide on hemlock health index. We only have hemlock health results for this year, but what we found is that hemlock health appears to have declined across plots, across communities, regardless of if they have been treated or not. So in Shop Hollow and Whitaker, regardless of if a plot had been treated, the health is in decline. This is our first slide on species richness, and the graph on your left is comparing species richness in Shop Hollow communities, and the graph on your right shows species richness in Whitaker communities. We're comparing hemlock dominant communities to beech dominant communities. And what we found is that species richness is in decline across communities, across hollows. This is especially evident in the Whitaker communities, where species richness declined by half over the last 10 years. So again, we're seeing species richness decline across communities, across hollow, but we're seeing the biggest decrease in Whitaker. This is our first slide on total density, and total density is number of species, average number of species per hectare. This is showing total density of hemlocks, and we're comparing total density of hemlocks in hemlock communities and total density of hemlocks in beech communities, and we're comparing the different locations. And what we found is that while total density of hemlocks is declining across communities, across hollows, there's a larger decline in total density of hemlocks in hemlock communities than there is in total density of hemlocks in beech communities. This is another slide on total density, but this time we're looking at total density of beeches. And again, while we found that the total density of beeches is declining across communities, across locations, we found that the total density of beeches is decreasing faster in beech communities than it is in hemlock communities. This is our first slide showing relative density. And this time we're looking at the relative density in Shop Hollow's hemlock community versus Shop Hollow's beech community. And these graphs only show the top 5 most important species in Shop Hollow's hemlock and Shop Hollow's beech community. And so what we found is that as the relative density of hemlock decreases in the hemlock community, the relative density of beech increases in Shop Hollow's hemlock community, while in the beech community in Shop Hollow, the relative density of the most important species stays relatively stable. This is another slide showing relative density. This time we're comparing the hemlock community to the beech community in Whitaker Branch. While the relative density of hemlock stayed relatively stable in the hemlock community, the relative density of beech increased, while the relative density of the other important species either decreased or remained stable. In Whitaker's beech community, the relative density increased. Sorry. In Whitaker's beech community, the relative density of beech increased, while the relative density of the other important species either remained stable or decreased. This is our first slide on relative basal area, and relative basal area is just showing how much space these species take up in proportion to the other species. And this time we're comparing the hemlock community in Shop Hollow to the hemlock community, or the beech community in Shop Hollow. And what we found is that as the relative basal area of hemlock decrease, the relative basal area of beech increases in the hemlock community. And in the beech community, the relative basal area of the most important species stays relatively stable. This is another slide comparing relative basal area, this time showing the hemlock community and the beech community in Whitaker. The relative basal area of hemlock remains relatively stable, but the relative basal area of beech increases, while the relative basal area of the other important species either remains stable or decreases. In the beech community in Whitaker, the relative basal area of beech increases, while the relative basal area of the other important species either stays stable or decreases. This is our first slide on importance values. Importance values show the sum of relative density and relative basal area. These are always going to sum to 200. And again, these only show the top 5 most important species in these communities. What we found is that as the importance value of hemlock decreases in the hemlock community in Shop Hollow, the importance value of beech increases in the hemlock community in Shop Hollow, so much so that the importance value of beech overtakes the importance value of hemlock in the hemlock community. In the beech community, the importance value of the most important species stays relatively stable. These are showing the importance values in the hemlock and beech community in Whitaker. And what we found is the importance value of hemlock stays relatively stable while the importance value of beech increases, but the importance value of the other important species either remains stable or decreases. In the beech community, the importance value of beech increases while the importance value of the other important species either remains stable or decreases. So a little bit of discussion about these results. We only looked at how hemlock woolly adelgid could affect change in the community, but climate change could also be a factor in community change. And while many second growth forests in Appalachia are seeing a shift towards red maple, LCW is seeing an increase in the importance of beech. This could be due to the fact that LCW already has a large proportion of beech dominant communities. And Shop Hollow's species dominance is shifting much faster than Whitaker's, especially in the hemlock communities, while Whitaker is seeing the bigger decrease in richness. So in conclusion, we saw a decrease in species richness across hollows, across communities, particularly in Whitaker, and we saw a decrease in total density, particularly total density of hemlocks in hemlock communities and beeches in beech communities. And importance values show that as hemlocks decline, beech trees are increasing in importance. I'd like to thank EKU, NSF, Dr. David Brown, Dr. Kelly Watson, Lilley Cornett Woods, Curtis Cox, and Renee Steinberger for their help on this project. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Deanna. Does anyone have any questions for her? Could perhaps type questions in chat as well, or people could speak up if they wish.
I have a quick question for you, Deanna. What was your favorite part about the project?
I really liked Whitaker, everything about Whitaker. I don't know if that's a Mm. um, I also really enjoyed honing tree ID because I felt like I was good at it before, but it was nowhere near where I was at the end of this project. So.
And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, like, what was the most scientifically challenging part of this project? Because I was in your shoes a year ago, and there were definitely some aspects that were scientifically challenging. But what about for you and your experience with the summer project?
Maybe kind of figuring out the stats at the end, not the stats themselves, but how we were going to include everything we wanted to include. I don't know if that helps.
No, for sure. I know exactly what you mean.
Can I toss in a question, please?
Yes.
I was just wondering, when you were talking before, and I know in the past, were you looking, you said treated plots and untreated plots. You were looking only at treated plots, or clarify that for me?
No, so not all of the plots were treated. Some of them were and some of them weren't. The treated plots were indicated by paint. Am I right? But not all of the plots that had hemlock in them were treated, which is why we included the hemlock health index. We wanted to make sure that there wasn't a large discrepancy in hemlock health between treated plots and untreated plots.
So your gut feeling, I was wondering, was doing the treatment doing any good?
From what we saw, all of the hemlocks were in decline. We only saw a few hemlocks that we classified as 2s, so relatively healthy. Even hemlocks that had been treated were still 3s and 4s.
Okay.
So while I would say it may be helping, they're still in decline.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I guess I have one for you, even though it's kind of just, it's not necessarily about exactly what you did, but if you were to be able to like kind of start the project over, was there something else that ended up being really interesting to you that you kind of wish you had more of a chance to explore?
I got really interested in looking at journal articles for emerald ash borer during the summer. I'm not for sure if we could have done something with that, but during the research phase, I got really interested in that. So maybe incorporating how ashes have declined into or maybe doing something with ash trees, but that's kind of where I was at.
No, I agree. That's another interesting aspect of the stuff out there. I guess before we move on, does anyone have any other questions for Deanna at the moment? All right, I suppose we can go ahead and move on then. Thank you, Deanna. So Jenna is a double major in math and biology at Transylvania, and is going to be speaking to us about more geology, or I guess it's hydrogeology, or whatever the term is for it. So it's a little bit different, but I hope everyone's just excited as I am to hear from her. So go ahead and let you get started.
Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, sweet. So hi everybody, as Ted said, my name is Jenna Rubens. I'm currently a junior at Transylvania University. This project was mentored by Dr. Jonathan Malzone, and it's entitled Using Hydrostratigraphic Correlation of Soil Cores to Understand the Ephemeral Hydrology of Ridgetop Wetlands. So a little bit of background. Throughout the course of this project, I was focused on the hydrology and the structure of ridgetop wetlands that are found in the Cumberland Ranger District of Daniel Boone National Forest. A wetland is defined as landscapes that cause groundwater discharge into the land surface, or that prevent rapid drainage of the water from the land surface, leaving a source of standing water. As you can see from this map, wetlands are quite prevalent throughout the country, as indicated by all the green spots. But in Kentucky, you don't really see any. But they do still exist in what are called geographically isolated wetlands. So geographically isolated wetlands are characterized by being in isolated areas, as the name suggests. They are found in upland areas and appear to lack connections to other surface water bodies, such as streams. However, they are usually connected to other water bodies via shallow subsurface flow. And there are several types of them, as seen in this picture taken from Golden et al. 2014. GIWs receive water from a variety of sources. In type 1, the wetland is being fed by both the groundwater, as seen right here, and precipitation, whereas in type 2 has this impermeable layer, so it's only fed by the runoff and precipitation. The wetlands in Daniel Boone National Forest are a mixture of these two structures because they're fed by precipitation and runoff from the wetlands, like in type 2.
You need to go up, Casey.
But they also recharge the groundwater, like type 1. They also have this permeable soil layer on top of the confining layer. So I will be trying to explain both the hydrology and the hydro period for the wetlands by making maps of the subsurface, kind of like these. So I'll be trying to look at hydrology, which is how the water flows through the wetland systems and aquifers, and the hydro period, which is how long it takes for the pool to fill up and how quickly it dries out. What we don't know about these wetlands is how they were formed, why do some ridges have several wetlands while others have none, and how does the structure of the bedrock and clay layers affect the hydrology of the ridgetop wetlands. Here are my study sites. So far, only 33 natural wetlands have been discovered using LiDAR technology in the Cumberland Ranger District of the Daniel Boone National Forest, which is in red. And then I will be making subsurface maps of 3 of these natural wetlands, DC2, BPN, and HEN. The objectives for my study are to examine how bedrock topography and the impermeable clay layer geometry control groundwater surface water interaction in these ridgetop isolated wetlands, and to examine the ridgetop wetland soil structure in order to understand the origin of the GIWs on the ridges of Daniel Boone National Forest. So my methods for this study, in order to test how the structure and clay layer, the structure of the bedrock and the clay layers of the GIWs in Daniel Boone National Forest affect the hydrology and function of wetlands, I will be making maps of the soil layers of the wetland by taking soil cores in order to track how the layers change throughout a transect of the wetland. This first image right here is of the drill rig I used, which operates by lifting and dropping this hammer to use gravity in order to force the drill into the ground. One drop of the hammer is considered one hammer blow. In order to get a core, we advance the drill through the ground, counting hammer blows as we go until the drill hits bedrock and can't advance any further. Once a soil core is taken, here are some examples of them. The colors of each layer of soil are recorded using the Munsell soil color chart. The site of each core is entered into a total station system, which is demonstrated right here, to get the exact elevation and distance. We then examined each core and evaluated the changes in the number of hammer blows to find the depth of the boundaries of the soil layers and keyed them into the elevation. We then plotted all the distance and elevations on a graph in order to make a template for the subsurface map. So moving on to the results of my study, on this slide are some notable cores taken from the DC2 wetland. This top image right here shows the B horizon that has speckled organic material, which are these dark spots in it. All the lower images show aquifers that we captured within the core, which is all these muddy looking spots. So there's a really good example right here, and this one has just a sliver of one. In DC2 and DC2 number 7 and DC2 number 10, you can see the exact moment when the water no longer permeates. So right about here, the water won't go any further down through the clay layer. This is a graph of the blows for the cores taken at the DC2 wetland. On the x-axis of each graph is the number of hammer blows, and on the y-axis is the depth of the hole. Each point represents how many hammer blows it took to move the drill 4 inches into the ground. This hammer blow method allows us to differentiate each soil layer by its density. However, sometimes it's difficult to interpret these maps because, as you can see, some cores exhibit a stair-stepping pattern like this. So the densities of the layers are very clearly differentiated. However, some cores have a very gradual increase in density, like the cores in the pools of the wetlands. So DC2 number 5, this is in the pool, and DC2 number 10 is also in a pool. They were probably lubricated by water, which explains why there does not appear to be a large change in density of the soil until bedrock. So in order to find the boundaries for the final map, both the hammer blows and the cores were examined. Here's my final map of the DC2 cross sections. We were able to track 5 separate soil layers through the transect of the DC2 wetland and use that data to make this subsurface map, where the x-axis is the distance and the y-axis is the elevation, both in meters. Some things to note are this prominent gray mottled clay layer throughout the wetland, which happens in every single one of the wetlands we looked at. And this clay layer is impermeable, so the water can only move through the A and B horizons. This is also the biggest natural wetland found thus far in Danube National Forest. There are 2 separate bathtub-like structures in the clay layer, so one right here and another right here, which is what both of these are able to hold water. So it kind of shows evidence for that this was at once 2 separate wetlands. And more evidence for that claim comes from this hillshade map of the area. So this is the bigger wetland right here, and this is the more shallow and less obvious wetland right here. And as you can see at the hillshade map, there's evidence of a really old landslide right here. And so all of these ridges are mountains that are slowly being eroded away over time. And this ridge in particular, a landslide occurred which moved the edge of the ridge in further and caused channel erosion to start, which basically cracked this bathtub-like structure of the front wetland, meaning it can no longer hold water. Therefore, these 2 separate systems became one at the time when this landslide occurred. All 3 wetlands we looked at have a similar stream channel like this, suggesting that the same thing might happen to them sometime in the future. Here's the DC2 Hydrograph taken from data collected by placing sensors in permeable wells throughout the wetland. The blue line is the water level of the surface water, whereas the gray and the orange are the groundwater wells. The x-axis is the date and time, and the y-axis is the water level keyed into the elevation of the wetland. Each peak shows the effect of a rainstorm, and the troughs show how the wetland recovers. Transpiration can be seen in the waves because the trees will drink the water during the nighttime or during the day, and then the water will recharge itself during the night. So you can see those kinds of peaks right here. The crash is the time period when the ground is hotter, so the water has a higher evaporation rate. The trees are pulling the water out of the deep soil so that the groundwater flow changes from an openly flowing water system to the lowlands to a more closed off and localized flow. So we can see the moment of the crash here because the minimum level of the groundwater stays pretty constant, and then all of a sudden it drops really quickly. The system will uncrash and crash several times. So here is an animation of the crash using this water level data plotted onto the transect map. So as you can see, during the spring, water will flow towards the lowland regions, which are over here. However, during the summertime, after all the trees have quote unquote woken up and gained all their leaves, the water flow will change such that the surface water will feed the groundwater, but all the water will remain in the system. So there's no longer enough water to get over this impermeable hump of clay to go into the lowland regions. Moving on to the second wetland we looked at, these are some notable cores from the BPN. In BPN 3, you can see a distinct boundary between the A and the B horizons because the A has more of this organic material, and then the darker color, the lack of dark color in the B horizon shows that that organic material has been moved up. BPN 6 shows more of the mottled clay, and then BPN 8 depicts an unidentified red granular soil that is not present in any other core. It appears to be breaking off into pebbles within the core, and this wasn't really found in any of the other wetlands. We don't really know its permeability or anything like that. Here's the map of the hammer blows for BPN. Note the very gradual increase in BPN 7, which is where the pool was. Here is the final cross section for the BPN wetland. Note that the B horizon is lighter in color than that of DC2, indicating that it has less organic material in it. And again, there are 2 scoops out of the bedrock. And there is a really large hump of clay right here, separating the wetland from the less obvious back divot. But this upland region can still hold water. And then again, we are unsure of the permeability of this unidentified red soil layer. However, there still appears to be this bathtub-like structure holding in the water. And then here's the hydrograph of BPN. Again, the surface water level is in blue and the groundwater is in orange, with the date and time on the x-axis and the water level keyed into elevation in meters on the y-axis. In this hydrograph, 3 distinct storm types can be seen: a groundwater-dominated storm, a non-dominated storm, and a surface water-dominated storm. So this is going to be an animation of the groundwater-dominated storm starting on July 11th, 2019. So here's pre-storm, the peak of the storm, where it's recovering, and the final crash. Throughout the course of the storm, the groundwater rises significantly while the surface water shows very little change. Therefore, most of the water that fell as rain went into recharging the groundwater aquifer, while very little went to raising the water level of the pool. This can either be due to slow rainfall or previously saturated soil, because if the soil is already saturated, the water can easily permeate through the ground instead of running off downslope into the pool. Here is an animation of the surface water dominated storm starting on October 6, 2019. So here's pre-storm, the peak of the storm, and then the post-storm recovery. Throughout the course of the storm, the surface water in the pool rises significantly, while the groundwater shows very little change. Therefore, in this case, most of the water that fell as rain went to raising the water level of the pool instead of recharging the groundwater aquifer. This is due to high and fast rainfall during a drought because the soil is extremely dry, making it harder for the water to permeate the soil. Instead, it acts as runoff into the pool. And then here's a non-dominated storm, which is a mixture of the two. Pre-storm, the peak of the storm, and as you can see in the peak, water can permeate into this less obvious divot up here, where the groundwater and surface water are equal, and then the crash. In this case, both the groundwater and the surface water rise significantly throughout the course of the storm. Finally, here are some notable cores from the last wetland we went to, which is HEN. In HEN 7, you could see the B horizon that is speckled with organic material again. And then HEN 3, this is just another example of the mottled gray clay layer. In HEN 4, you can see the entirety of a captured aquifer, which starts about right here and ends right here. So it's all this muddy material on the B horizon. And then in HEN 2, as you can see through this hockey pucking structure right here, this is the saprolite, suggesting that the saprolite is highly weathered shale that's eventually going to weather more into the clay that we see right here. Here's the graph of the blows for the HEN cross section. You can very clearly track the layers throughout this wetland, which is a lot better than you could of the other ones. Here's the final HEN cross section. Note again, we have these two slight divots in the clay layer, but this divot in the clay layer seems offset from where the pool is because the pool was right in between HEN 5 and HEN 6. So moving on to some conclusions, by using the soil cores and the subsurface maps, we are able to come to several key conclusions, including that these wetlands are found in residual soils derived from silty mud rocks like shale or mudstone that are capping the sandstone ridges in particular locations. The locations of these wetlands appear to be associated with a bedrock depression that is overlain by impermeable shale that has weathered into clay. We know there is residual soil because we are on top of an eroding mountain with gradual boundaries that match each other in material. Every layer is just slightly altered from the layer beneath it. Therefore, the soil was created in situ, or it was formed in place, as opposed to being deposited. The soil in the wetlands was on average over twice as deep as the soil on the ridges without the wetlands. And the soil on the ridges without the wetlands was also much more rocky. These ridgetop wetlands are naturally created by erosion and will eventually be destroyed by erosion as well, in the case of DC2, like the front pool. So in conclusion, these wetlands are created by geology as opposed to any anthropogenic or surficial processes like tree fall. Corbin sandstone, which makes up these ridges, is embedded with sparse, thin layers of shale. These wetlands appear to be formed whenever the erosion has eroded the ridges such that one of the shale layers is exposed. The shale then weathers into clay, causing water to accumulate and create a wetland. All three wetlands that I examined also have a less obvious pocket or divot in the clay layer near it that can hold even more groundwater. Pre-crash, the wetlands are delocalized and the water will flow down the ridge to feed the streams, but during the summer the water stays within the system and acts as a water bank for trees during time of droughts. So the system will become more localized during the summer, allowing the trees to drain the groundwater through transpiration, which causes the ephemeral crash that defines these wetlands. Also, summer rainfall recharges the groundwater and surface water differently, depending on antecedent conditions. Given slow rainfall or saturated soil, the groundwater may recharge with negligible changes to the wetland level. However, during long droughts or high rainfall, the wetland may refill with negligible changes to the groundwater. I would like to thank Dr. Malzone for his great mentoring throughout the course of this project, EKU and NSF for the opportunity, Drs. Brown and Watson for always getting me whatever I needed to succeed in the field, and Daniel Draper, Rebecca Moskell, and Ella Lindley-Fry for their assistance in the field. Any questions?
Hey, Jenna, this is Stephen Richter. I have a question for you.
Yeah, totally.
Great job and really cool project. So I understand what you mean when you say crash. Basically, when the trees leaf out and evapotranspiration's happening, the wetlands drying down, the groundwater included, and then if there's a clay hump, the water is then restricted just to the basin. But is that, I'd never heard that term before, or maybe I have when John talks, sometimes it goes right over my head because I don't understand it all, the geological terms. But what is that term crash like from a geologic or hydrogeo perspective? Is that something from the literature, or what else?
I don't think it's like an actual term, but it's just the easiest way to describe what's actually happening, because all of a sudden the groundwater is at this constant level, and then all of a sudden it just drops off.
Oh, okay. So it's not a term, a geological term?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Okay. Curious, because I hadn't heard it. Interesting. All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
Jenna, I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
So the methods you're using are really intensive, and it takes a lot of work to get the cores and to do the hydrology monitoring. I'm just wondering, is it possible after surveying, 3 or 4 or 5 of these wetlands and getting kind of the data that shows how the cores and the hydrology are related, is there a way to kind of speed up the process and kind of just select a simpler or fewer of those techniques so you could go into a wetland and kind of get a better idea of its hydrology without having to do all of that stuff?
So I know from Dr. Malzone's research that there are 3 different types of wetlands found in the Danube Boom. And so maybe if we have one of these kinds of models for each of the types, we can then correlate it in that if this one works this way, this one probably works the same way if it's the same type. But at the same time, using my coring method, like you just need to do one transect and you pretty much know what's going on with the water and how about it's moving through the system.
So you could do the coring without doing the hydrology monitoring.
Yeah, the water data just kind of gave us a more accurate of how much water is actually in this wetland. But even before we had the water level, we already kind of knew how the water was moving through the system.
Okay, thanks.
I have a bit of a follow-up question about the crashing or the crash that would happen. Is the crash when the leaf out happens, is that pretty universal across communities to your knowledge, or does the tree community really matter for that? Do you know if anyone really looks at that?
So all of these wetlands that we looked at are categorized as being vernal pools. So every time other than the summer, there's basically going to be water sitting in there. And then when the summer comes and the trees leaf out, the water is being drained. So from that, it's pretty much guaranteed that like no matter how much the tree around them, how many trees are around them, that crash is going to happen because this wetland is acting as a water bank for all the trees when they need it during the times of drought during the summer.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get rid of trees, will I have water longer?
I mean, perhaps, but then evaporation is also going to happen during the summer, during the hot temperature of the summer. Are there any other questions?
I suppose there's no more questions. So thank you, Jenna. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Great job to both of you.
And I don't believe there's